In 2018, I lived a pretty normal life for a 19-year-old guy. I worked full-time and I was very, very active. I loved hitting the gym, I loved cycling and running, and I would get up every morning at 5 a.m. before work to get out and do my training. I had many goals and passions, many of them fitness related. That year, I actually was training specifically for an Ironman distance duathlon. It was called the Seriously Brutal Duathlon in Wales, and I was really stoked. It was an epic course. Overall, I was very fit and healthy, as I had been my whole life as a lover of sport and fitness. I had good cardio, good physical strength, and overall, I had no health issues whatsoever. I was as healthy as you could imagine a 19-year-old man to be. Now, this would change after one fateful day in March when I went with some friends to Waterworld. Now, if you're British, you may have heard of Waterworld. Perhaps you've been there yourself. But after that day at Waterworld, me and my friend were incredibly sick. We had this really bad fever. We were vomiting. And my friend actually said it was the most sick he had ever been after we went to Waterworld. Now, he would go on to recover fully and get his full health back. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case for me. It all started with a slight sensation that something was wrong, something was off. Although I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was, I just had this strange residual fatigue even after I had gotten over the fever and wasn't throwing up anymore. Now, this sensation was very, very subtle at first, and I didn't really notice it much. So I just ignored it and went straight back into training after I recovered, and I was stoked to really get back on track, train hard, and improve my fitness for the upcoming Ironman. Now, at this point, I had no idea that this was going to become the beginning of the end of my long life of being a fitness enthusiast, a sport enthusiast, and someone with big ambitions for sport. Essentially, what would happen is I ended up having a cycle where I would go back to training, I would work hard for a couple of weeks, and then suddenly I would hit a wall. I would wake up in the morning and my throat would be really sore. I wouldn't feel right. I would feel this really strong fatigue that wasn't natural. And so I would take a few days off. I'd be like, right, okay, maybe I pushed a bit hard. Let's ease off a little bit and recover, and we will be right back to it. That was what I thought, but unfortunately the cycle just continued, and actually it was getting worse and worse. At first, I could train for weeks without having to take a break from getting sick. But after a few months of this cycle, suddenly I would wake up after just one training session and everything would feel wrong and I would feel very unwell. Now, essentially what these symptoms were was just this sort of very alien, crippling fatigue throughout my whole body, my brain, my muscles, my nervous system. Everything just felt weak and fatigued. Now, as someone who's been into the gym, into running and cycling for a long time, I know very well the sensation after a hard workout when you're healthy. Of course, you feel fatigued, your muscles feel sore, but this was very, very different. With these symptoms, I would be waking up in the night, feeling incredibly hot. My pulse, my glands on my neck would be throbbing. My sinuses would feel full of pressure. And as I said, fatigue permeated my whole body. So in July of 2018, after a few months of this, I made the decision to put my training on hold. I thought I just need up to a month off, a month absolute maximum. I need to let my body recover, perhaps gain some weight because I was very, very lean at the time, and then I'll be good to go. I'll put this behind me and I'll be back on track for training and be ready to smash the Ironman. That was what I thought, but unfortunately, as of today, in August of 2023, I was never able to return to training or sport in any capacity, and my health has only declined since that point. So in this video, I want to detail what that journey over the last 5 years has been like and tell you about what exactly happened to me that turned a healthy young 19-year-old man who loved sport into someone who cannot do any training or sport whatsoever and spends most of the day in the bedroom. Now, I should also mention, at the same time that I got sick going to Waterworld, I was actually made redundant from my full-time job, and I had been pursuing new employment, but after I started getting these bad symptoms and had to quit training, I had to decline the job offer I had because I realized that I just really did not feel up to going to a job every day. So after I had quit training, I expected myself to recover and get better, but it was actually sort of the reverse that happened. The trend of feeling more and more unwell just very gradually continued. Perhaps not as rapidly now I'd let my body recover and I wasn't training, but before long I was feeling these symptoms of fatigue, sinus pressure, etc. Even when I hadn't performed a session or done any physical exertion. It just became the norm. I would wake up in the morning and instantly I would just have the fatigue, the strange feeling throughout my whole body that really inhibited my ability to function and really made it hard to do anything productive, let alone get out and train. So during this time, I was of course seeing my local GP, having doctor's appointments and telling them about my symptoms and trying to figure out what exactly was going on. Now they ran many extensive blood tests and I saw many different doctors, but every test they ran on me was coming back impeccably healthy. I had hormone levels tested, blood nutrient levels, I had my organ function tested, I was having my blood values examined, my hemoglobin, hematocrit, iron levels. All of these things were just coming back with perfect function and the doctors could not find anything wrong. They checked me physically, they gave me x-ray scans, everything was in order. So why on earth was I feeling so terrible all the time? I got the answer to this question around a year after all of this. Essentially, I figured out after much research on my own that what I had must be chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, chronic fatigue syndrome is also known as myalgic encephalomyelitis, and it's a condition that's characterized by at least 6 months of persistent and unexplained fatigue. Essentially, it's diagnosed when doctors have ruled out all the other possible causes of your fatigue, and there's essentially nothing left, so you get diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. Another characterizing symptom of it is what's called post-exertional malaise. Essentially, this is where after exertion, whether that be physical or mental, you get this crash afterwards. You will have a whole host of symptoms and this wave of fatigue come over you. Exactly what I've been having when I've been trying to push through and train. Now, post-exertional malaise gives you essentially dilemmas every day of how you're going to spend your limited energy. For me, I'm very goal-oriented, so the big thing that I've just pretty much cut out mostly is socializing. I have a very limited social life, and that's because I try and prioritize working towards my goals, and I know that any time I spend my energy socializing, I'm unfortunately missing out on my already very limited capacity to progress with goals. And if I don't progress with important goals, then how am I going to progress in life? And I'm just going to stagnate without that. It can be very hard to describe what these sensations of fatigue feel like because, it's just hard to describe a sensation to someone who hasn't quite had the same sensation. But the best way that I can describe it is when you're sick, you often get fatigue, and the fatigue is different to if you're just sleepy or if you've done a hard workout. It's sort of an unnatural fatigue that feels very wrong. And this is the same sort of fatigue you feel with chronic fatigue syndrome, although in addition you also get many other symptoms that come along. It's like a package deal. You'll get this bad brain fog, which really impairs your ability to concentrate and even to have conversations sometimes. Now, unfortunately, chronic fatigue syndrome is essentially a complete medical mystery. Nobody has any complete understanding of the mechanisms of the illness. Nobody has any reliable treatment to offer you. You're essentially in limbo as far as the medical system goes. Now, I'm not going to give the entire detail of my last 5 years with chronic fatigue syndrome, but essentially it's been a very undulating journey. There's been many big dips in my health and level of functioning, but overall, I unfortunately have been getting worse over the last 5 years. At this point, I do feel as though I've stabilized, but the symptoms I was feeling at the beginning of the illness really just prevented me from doing physical activity. But besides that, I was very functional. Unfortunately, many times today and over the last years, I've had to just spend entire days in bed. Now, the extremely unstable nature of your health with chronic fatigue syndrome can easily cause quite a lot of anxiety. Many people with chronic fatigue syndrome are unfortunately in such bad shape that they cannot really do anything besides lay in bed, and maybe they can have a conversation for 15 minutes each day. But even the most basic tasks like getting up and showering or washing their clothes, preparing meals, are just out of the question for them because of how severely bad their health is. So when you start getting bad dips and you can't figure out why, and it just seems unexplained, it's easy to worry, wow, right now my health's bad enough. What if it gets 5 times worse? What if I just become unable to do anything really at all besides lay in a bed and maybe have a 10-minute conversation each day, maybe have a shower? What if that's my life? What if I'm permanently trapped in a cycle like that? Now, this isn't even just irrational overthinking. This can often be a genuine possibility with this illness. As I mentioned, it's a reality for many people with it. Now, that being said, I feel I've adapted to the illness pretty well, and I still very much enjoy my life. I've been able to accept the fact that I cannot do sport anymore, even though that was a big passion of mine. And I've found different outlets, essentially, and I think that's really the key. Whatever your capacity is, there should be something that you can do, and for me, I'm still have the level of functioning to be able to play chess often, and I've also found an extremely deep interest in philosophy over the time of being ill, and that's a subject I've been really fascinated by and spent a lot of time over the last 5 years developing my interest and studying in more depth. I actually just recently graduated with a bachelor's degree in the subject. Now, I wanted to finish this video by just giving some more philosophical reflections about mindset and positive thinking when dealing with an illness in this way. These are some thoughts that have helped me to understand my place in the world and find meaning in my life, despite the fact that a lot of what I found meaning in was stripped away from me. A lot of goals, pursuits, and ambitions I had were entirely taken. So kind of reinventing yourself and resculpturing who you are and what you're about in this world is definitely a process I'm familiar with over the last 5 years. Of course, over the last 5 years, there have been occasions where I've had negative thoughts about my situation and illness. It's easy to think about how much better things could have been, about how unfortunate and unlucky you are, and about all the things you'll miss out on. So I wanted to share one insight that has helped me to maintain a positive outlook and not sink into such a negative mindset about my situation. And that essentially stems from the recognition that so many people have problems and adversity which they believe make their life unfulfilling and lead them to be unsatisfied with their life. The mindset that if only I could have X, Y, Z, or be free from problems A, B, and C, then I could finally be happy, is extremely pervasive. This is, of course, a very natural and tempting way to think about an illness like chronic fatigue syndrome. Oh, life is bad right now. Life is unfulfilling. I'm not satisfied with my situation. But if I could just have 50% or even 100% better health, then everything will be bliss and I'd be happy. Now, there's a good chance that if you reflect, you've been guilty of this sort of thought pattern in your life at some point as well. It's extremely natural for humans. We typically find something to be dissatisfied about and then use that as a reason to be dissatisfied with our life situation as a whole. We just always seem to identify something we want and fall into the thought process that if we could just have that thing, then everything will be fine. Whether that be more money, a nicer apartment, more social status, being more attractive, having a better physique. Now, when you recognize how pervasive this mindset is, and then you see that there are countless people who are free from the problems or have the things that you believe you need to be happy, yet they're still not happy, you can see that really it's not about our particular circumstances or what we have or exactly which problems we do or don't face. Those things aren't really what counts for being satisfied with life. It's more a deep-rooted aspect of our cognition that just leaves us to be never really satisfied with our current circumstances and to always desire more and more, whether again that be wealth or whether it be career, status. We just seem to always desire more and never be satisfied. It's really no surprise that a central tenet of so many ancient philosophies, ancient school of thought that we commonly think are very rich with wisdom, have said that you should love your own fate, you should be satisfied with your lot in life, and you shouldn't compare yourself to what things you don't have, and essentially not run on the never-ending mental treadmill of thinking, oh, if I could just satisfy this desire, then everything would be fine. Essentially, this way of thinking only disturbs your mental tranquility and just leads to a never-ending dissatisfaction. Now, given our track record of having these desires, having these problems we think we need to solve to be happy in the past, and then solving many of them and fulfilling many of our desires, only to still not be satisfied and just have more desires, more problems we think need solving, you can have a pretty strong probabilistic inference that solving this next desire or solving this next problem that you believe will finally give you satisfaction probably will not. And instead, you'll only generate more desires, you'll only find more problems with your life, and you'll constantly use them as barriers as to being satisfied with your life. Now, any requirement that we demand in order to live a good life is, from an objective standpoint, always entirely arbitrary and self-imposed. This includes the desire that we have to be fully healthy in order to be living a good life. Now, of course, that's not to say you shouldn't strive for the best health you can. That is something I personally do and believe in greatly. But if ill health is outside of your control, then you should not allow it to be a reason why you can't be satisfied with your life, why your life can never be good because of this always present barrier to it. That barrier is essentially self-inflicted and something that can be overcome by changing how you judge your present circumstance. Now, recognizing this has helped me to focus on the many great things in my life and not overly fixate on unfortunate circumstances that are outside of my control, like having chronic fatigue syndrome, despite the fact that it undeniably does reduce my quality of life and inhibits what I can do greatly. It's outside of my control whether or not I live with this specific chronic illness. But controlling my thoughts, controlling my emotions, and controlling my judgments about my present condition, those things are all inside my control. In addition, having chronic fatigue syndrome already delivers pain and suffering, so why would I ever want to add to that suffering by accentuating it with negative thoughts, negative emotions about my situation, when I can instead opt to preserve mental tranquility and view my situation in a stoic and positive way. Now, as I mentioned, having chronic fatigue syndrome does greatly limit what I can do. I'm unable to compete or train in sport nowadays. But I replaced that with the game of chess, which isn't so physically taxing, but still gives me goals to work towards, a way to measure progress, better myself, and it satisfies my thirst for competing against others. I might be unable to hold down a full-time job, but I still graduated with a bachelor's degree in philosophy, which I got into especially after having lots of spare time to read and to meditate and reflect, given my abundant spare time after having this illness. If that hadn't happened, probably I never would have developed this passion for philosophy, which I invested a lot of time into and was able to get a degree in. Chronic fatigue syndrome may have changed my life a lot, but I still have lots to be grateful for, lots to be excited about, and I'm overwhelmingly happy with my life. So I think that will wrap up this video, but I hope if you watched this far, you found this video engaging and interesting and enjoyed me sharing a bit about my story of having this illness. Thank you for watching.